Various films and video games like Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider often show ancient temples and tombs deviously trapped with spiked pits, rolling boulders, and sometimes supernatural but deadly bait. Even before films and games, stories and fiction such as King Solomon's Mines, an adventure novel published in 1885 by Sir H. Rider Haggard, mention secret complex traps within a South American mine of a former African king. The reality is that many of these ancient traps are exaggerated fantasy designed to heighten action scenes. That doesn't mean that traps in ancient tombs never existed, though. Here's 5 cases where some ancient places of the past turned out to have surprises lying in wait. Pitfalls are a commonly seen trap in many video games and tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, often being hidden in old burial grounds and temples as a deterrent for thieves and raiders. Sometimes in games and movies, it's shown that pitfalls will have deadly surprises, such as sharpened spikes, crushing walls, and even snakes. Unsurprisingly, pitfalls have been shown to have existed in ancient tombs in history, although not as fantastical as seen in movies and games tended to present them as. The tomb of Amenhotep III, located in Egypt, contains one such trap. A false floor just before a false wall in the tomb contains a 20-foot drop down a smooth and featureless shaft, while the floor at the bottom of the shaft contains only smooth stone. Such a fall would likely cause broken bones and be a terrible death sentence for anybody that could not help themselves back out again. Pitfalls and false floors did little to deter tomb robbers of ancient Egyptian tombs. Archaeologists theorize that many robberies of ancient Egyptian tombs only happened a few years after their construction, where robbers collaborated with the tomb's architects and builders, who would have known how to circumvent any traps or false walls to reach the treasures within. Ancient cultures have a gratuitous knowledge of poisons and toxins. Ancient Egyptians were familiar with belladonna and mandrake as poisons, and Roman Emperor Nero favored the use of cyanide for assassinations. Therefore, it shouldn't be much of a shock to find out some tombs use toxic powders as a method to deter robberies. The tomb of the Red Queen of Palenque is a jungle pyramid located in southern Mexico, where it was built between 600 to 700 AD. It was discovered in 1994 by Mexican archaeologist Hernando Gonzalez Cruz. The sarcophagus and many of the treasures inside of the burial chamber of the tomb were covered in cinnabar, a bright red dust made from the ground ore of Mercury. In the past, cinnabar was used as a coloring pigment for face paint, clothing, and jewelry in many parts of the world. Over time, it was discontinued when it was discovered to be highly toxic to humans. The discovery of the burial chambers being completely coated in cinnabar made for quite the shock to the excavation crew, who had to immediately retreat and return later with protective gear and clothing. Another common trope when it comes to traps in ancient tombs and dungeons is the classic falling rocks trap. Raiders of the Lost Ark made this one particularly famous in its opening iconic scene. These traps did exist, although there was no evidence to suggest that ancient cultures were able to build anything as complex and death-defying as the rolling boulder that almost crushed Indiana Jones. Instead, Spaniards are the ones primarily credited for using simple falling rock traps to protect their treasure caches during their age of exploration into North American lands. This age took place between the end of the 15th century to the 18th century. Several of these traps have been discovered by archaeologists in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Utah, and California. These traps were used to either fall directly onto a potential looter or seal off an exit to leave them trapped inside. Some explorers have found evidence of these caches being looted and a trap already activated, showing that for the most part, these traps were not very complex and could be easily bypassed in many cases. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang is the tomb of the first emperor to have unified all of China. This infamous tomb is incredibly large, at 2,263 feet by 820 feet, and also contains 8,000 carved terracotta warrior statues. The lower mausoleum of the tomb has not yet been excavated, due to a large fear of traps within them. One of these traps that are described in ancient Chinese scrolls and texts are mechanical crossbows designed to go off when pressure plates or certain doorways are opened. While scientists and archaeologists have not yet seen these traps up close, these same ancient scrolls and texts have been accurate in describing other features and details of the underground tomb, such as certain treasures and the terracotta army that's within them. This gives proof that these traps not only exist, but are still potentially very dangerous. Some archaeologists have said that the wood and sinew of the crossbows could have potentially deteriorated over time, although others argue that if built correctly, they could still be functional. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang still has one last surreal feature about it. The Qin Emperor is said to have been buried with hand-dug lakes of liquid mercury and rivers around him. Mercury is a toxic substance that could poison the body over time. Inhaling mercury vapor can produce harmful effects on the nervous, digestive, and immune systems. It can also harm the lungs and kidneys. Large amounts can be especially fatal. Despite the lower mausoleum of the tomb not yet being open, evidence suggests that this trap is very likely to be real due to soil samples being taken from around the tomb having very high concentrations of mercury in them, which grows stronger as you approach the area around his grave. In ancient China, mercury was a common ingredient in medicines and used to treat sores, scabies, ringworm, and even insomnia. It was believed by Chinese legends to prolong your life and be a key to immortality. Ironically, the high amounts ingested likely hastened the deaths of many who used it, including the emperor himself. In the end, many of the deadly traps you've seen in films, books, and games are simply exaggerated fiction. However, pop culture still frequently includes them in many stories involving ancient tombs and temples. Why are so many fascinated with this idea? Maybe it's a way to inject excitement into a world of archaeology which many see as boring. Still, there's many potential unearthed and unexplored old sites, tombs, and temples in the world, one of which might contain things that even movies, books, and games cannot predict. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time on Horrors, Freaks, and Creeps.